Welcome everyone to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. This week, I'd like to welcome back my regular guest, Kvelduflr Gundarsson. And since it's February and all, I thought, we can't let the show go by without having a love show. So I thought perhaps this would be a great time for it to bring Kvelduflr on and talk about basically the heathen Norse Germanic view of romance, marriage, family, and that sort of thing. Over to you, Kvelduflr.
Okay, well, the first thing I've got to say is this is totally the wrong time of year to be talking about this. I think people are thinking of the Christian holiday, which probably goes back in many ways to the Roman holiday. In fact, among our people, the appropriate time for a show like this would be just before the beginning of May, because Valborg, May Eve, whatever, and to some degree in some areas, also Midsummer's Eve, were the time when you went out in the woods at night and you gathered greenery and flowers, and then you made a big deal out of putting them outside your lover's door at dawn. The climate may have had a lot to do with this, because of course if you wanted to go out and make whoopee in the woods, you probably weren't going to be doing that in Sweden in February. You'd lose crucial bits for making whoopee with. So this is really totally the wrong time, but that's okay. This is the show we're going to do now anyway.
Yes, I can think of how severe winter and bitter cold might put a dampener on certain activities and even hormones.
Yeah, given that people tended to live with several generations in one house, you'd think, okay, bundling up nice and warm together through the long, dark, boring winter nights, fine. Not so fine if Granny's in the next cot over to you.
Yeah, it would kind of dampen the mood. Okay, well, given the fact even it's the wrong time of year, why don't you give us a little more information?
Okay, well, people don't generally think of the Vikings as big romantic types, but as with any human people, I suspect, romance was a fairly significant topic. If you read, for instance, the family sagas, there are all sorts of interesting interpersonal things going on, some of them described in very great detail indeed. But there are a number of sagas which deal with romances that went well or that didn't go well. Of course, once we get to the Fornalder Saga, the old stories, such as Volsunga Saga, we see great and tragic romance taking an even more important role, and sometimes the family sagas actually reflect this. We see the story of Gudrun and Kjartan, for instance, in Laxdæla Saga, which bears a number of striking resemblance to the story of Gudrun and Sigurdur in Volsunga. And this is also borne out by some of the archaeological evidence, in particular runic inscriptions. Already on the continent in the 6th and 7th century, we're starting to get a number of love inscriptions. And one of the interesting things about these, while most surviving inscriptions imply a male rister, a male rune master or carver. And of course one should remember that most surviving inscriptions are the thus and so made this for thus and so, and men had tended to do most of the craft work that was longer lasting. Nevertheless, even when we look at the corpus of magical stuff, it tends to be a bit weighted towards men, but already we see female rune masters, and they are carving their inscriptions quite often on weaving tools or spinning tools, textile work tools, which suggests that both the runic inscription and the spell that presumably went with it, and the very old and very culturally dominant indeed women's art of doing magic, of exerting power through textile work, were being combined there. And this went on into the Viking Age. There's a lovely weaving tablet from Lund where a woman basically wishes her weeping on a woman belonging to a man. And she is the guy probably ditched her. She was probably sitting there doing her weaving, crying over the guy that this other woman had taken away from her, and wishing that heartbreak on the woman who took him. So you can easily see this happening. Now, one interesting thing in the Icelandic laws was that it was actually a matter suitable for law if one were to write love poetry, the kind of poetry that Snorri says was specifically holy to Freya, to an unmarried woman. And part of this is because marriage was a very big financial and political deal, and there was this tendency to discourage young women from engaging in sex before they got married for that very reason. You wanted to get a good partner, one of at least equal standing and wealth to your family, and, that meant putting on a good impression. But it's also been theorized by a number of scholars that the reason the poetry was forbidden was not just by way of avoiding the occasion of seduction, but also by way of avoiding the very strong possibility that magic could be exerted by means of such poetry.
And that would make sense.
And magical seduction, it's certainly a theme in some of the legends of Odin. In one case, in the case of Rindr, rather unpleasantly, more magical rape than seduction, really, but usually more by way of seduction.
So that gives us a little bit of background to the sagas, but what are some of the just some more information? For example, you were talking about keeping young women from having suitors or having sex before marriage. Was that actually as true for the pre-conversion?
As best we can tell, it seems to have been a thing, and it's hard to tell because we're going from mostly laws and stories written down at some point after the conversion, but it seems pretty pervasive. There don't seem to have been a great deal by way of legal penalties for it, but it does seem to have been a cultural thing that, you wanted to have if you were a woman, you wanted to have a fairly clean reputation when you were looking at a suitor. And to understand that in context, it's important to look at the way that the Norse saw marriage. While there is a huge amount of romance in the sagas, it's not necessarily by way of marriage type romance. The evidence suggests that by and large, a marriage was a partnership of people who were social and financial equals, and this is very important. We'll be getting to more of this later when we talk about the practice of polygamy and concubinage. But it was a joining of two families, and there were some very specific financial arrangements. A woman would take with her a dowry, and she would also receive a usually equal payment from her husband, the gift that the Norse called the munder, or the continental Germans would refer to as the mourning gift, which would be set aside, and that was basically something that would be passed on to the children if they stayed married, if the wife predeceased the husband, whatever. But it was also by way of being a prenup contract in case of divorce. If a couple got divorced, the woman got to take her munder and her dowry, and this was her financial security. And divorce was one of the things that was very easy to come by. A woman had as much right to decide to divorce as a man did, and there are plenty of examples in the sagas where a woman gets sufficiently ticked off for one reason or another and divorces her husband, sometimes for very interesting causes indeed. The most famous one, and if you've got any small children listening, you might want to put your hands over their ears at this point. The Norse weren't all that shy, but there was one occasion where an Icelandic gentleman had, for a little while, been the lover of Queen Gunhildr of Eric Bloodaxe and Gunhildr fame, and when he left her, she cursed him, saying basically that he'd never enjoy the woman in Iceland he was leaving her for. Well, he got back, and he married her, and a few months later she brought up a divorce suit on the ground that his willy was too large and they could not actually manage to have sex properly. This was a perfectly legitimate and reasonable cause for divorce.
Yeah, really pragmatic one. Man of steel, woman of Kleenex.
Yeah, I actually used that theme in my novel Beowulf, in the question of how come Beowulf never got married, huh? Well, there is no explanation in the poem. The poem, unlike the sagas, doesn't talk about Beowulf's private life at all, but there's no indication that he's married, which was odd. So, I used a combination of a bit of a rewrite of this scene with indeed Larry Niven's immortal Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex monograph.
Now, that's actually, okay, you just said that Beowulf is never mentioned as being married, which was odd. So most people would presumably have been married.
Yeah, people, you got married.
Yeah.
Our ancestors, they were living in kind of a harsh climate in pre-agricultural times. You got married. You passed on the family line.
I guess traditionally what would men and women have been looking for in romance and marriage, and then maybe bring that forward to the present day.
Okay, well, traditionally, the first thing you were looking for in a marriage partner was someone who was of at least equal social status and financial backing to yourself. It was quite often arranged by the parents. After that, once one got down to the individual choices, well, the evidence suggests that you were still looking for somebody who was of a good social position. And there's a wonderful bit which actually illustrates the answer to this question, where Erik Skaklegrimson is looking for a good husband for his very favorite daughter, who is throughout the sagas quite a bit of a daddy's girl. And the lad he finds that looks most promising is a fellow called Olafr the Peacock. Now, Olafr the Peacock is the son of a well-off Icelander, and his concubine, his slave, Melkorka, who turned out to be, quote, the daughter of an Irish king. People who are familiar with Irish history at the time suspect this means Daddy had 5 cows, but anyway, that's not really how it's presented in the saga. But anyway, Melkorka is first a concubine and continues to be a concubine. She doesn't get on with wife number 1, so her husband sets her up with her own farmstead and everything. And she raises this son, and when he wants to go back to Ireland to visit the royal family there, Melkorka looks at the guy who bought her and, gave her the farmstead and all and says, bye-bye, I'm marrying this other fella. He's been a great help around the farm. He's got ready cash. I want my son to go visit his relatives. At any rate, so there's Olaf the Peacock. Now, he's a promising lad. The Peacock is describing the fact that he's a really fancy dresser, and he's accomplished, and he's a good fighter, and he's good looking, and he's got all these great qualities. So Eowk says to his daughter, you're going to marry this guy. And she looks up at him and says, but Daddy, everyone always said I was your favorite, but that can't be true, 'cause you're marrying me to the son of a slave. And she whines and moans a bit, and then she gets to meet Olafr and realizes, hey, this isn't such a bad deal after all, and she marries him and has a load of kids, and their descendants are still running around Iceland today. So that's how it worked when it worked well. And then you get the other side, you get the theme of the relationships that are doomed not to work. I mentioned Gudrun and Kjartan, where in this instance, magic actually gets in the way. A king's daughter in Norway who's rather taken with Kjartan, but there doesn't seem to have been major stuff going on between them. But she gives him this beautiful headdress made of linen and adorned with a load of gold, and tells him to give it to the woman he's going to marry, who at that time he and everyone else thinks is going to be Gudrun. Now he's on his way back, and the daughter of the guy he's traveling with gets into his stuff and sees this thing and tries it on, and he sees her in it, and immediately realizes that this is the woman he must have. This is the woman he must marry. And a lot of stuff proceeds from this, and eventually Kjartan ends up dead, mostly by Gudrun's doing and such. But there is this strong implication that that magic has interfered with the ongoing relationship. Cormac's saga even more so. Cormac is in love with this woman, and there's a curse put on them that they won't enjoy each other. Now, Cormac has a foster mother by the name of Thordis Spalkona, who is very accomplished, and he's on his way to a duel, and she says to him, Cormacer, spend the night with me. I'll see what I can do for you. And the immediate intention suggested is that she's going to, weave him one of those spells where iron doesn't bite on him. And when I say weave a spell, I probably do mean actually weave it, because that was how you traditionally protected your menfolk from being bitten by iron. You wove them a shirt or a cloak or something with this magic in it. But anyway, so Cormac lies down and he wakes up and he sees her getting up and heading out of the house with a goose, and he says, hey, what you doing? And she says something like, Cormacer, sit down, shut up, be quiet, don't ask questions. And she tries this a couple of times, and each time he wakes up. And the third time he's a bit late, and he sees her heading out, so he follows her out, and he finds that she's just killed 2 geese with their blood running into a bowl, quite possibly an offering bowl, and she's just about to do the third one, and he says, hey, what's up? And she turns around and says, you idiot, if you had just kept your trap shut, I would have lifted this curse, you would have been able to enjoy the woman you love, and now you've screwed it up. Now, one of the main things in Cormac's saga is that Cormacer, he keeps getting advice on magical things that he is to do or not mess with or whatever, and he deliberately messes it up every time. On the face of this may have been, see what a hero he is, he scoffs at all this pagan stuff, but since every time he does it, it turns out pretty badly for him, might be a bit of a subtext there. Interestingly, the Norse were aware of physical beauty, but it doesn't seem to have been one of their main things. Generally, when a woman is described as beautiful, that consists of she's really well-dressed and has a lot of blonde hair. When a man is good-looking, well, it's mentioned that he's good-looking. Sometimes it's mentioned that he's got good hair. But that doesn't seem to have necessarily been crucial to courtship, and we can look at Eöt Skallagrimsson's initial courtship, which is pretty enlightening. Now, Eöt was an ugly guy. There really is no other word for it. Every indication in the saga is that the guy was, in fact, really butt ugly. Big, ugly fellow, went bald early, had a face on him like, well... invent your own rude metaphor. Okay, so here's this guy, and here is a nice banquet happening. Landowner, he's got an attractive young daughter, and Eöt sees her and thinks this might be a good match. So he comes over and asks something to the effect of whether she'd share a horn with him, because sharing a horn with someone was a very personal thing. You only shared a horn with like a best friend or a spouse or someone you were courting, but I've talked about that on previous shows. And she looks up at him and says, who are you that wants to sit down by me? And Eöt absolutely charms her by coming out extemporaneously with a pretty good poem, basically saying, and I fought here and here and here, and I totally kicked butt, and I'm a really great fighter, and as you see by the fact that I'm making this really terrific and elaborate poem up out of my head, I'm also an awesome poet. And she said, oh, okay, so sit down, guy, and they get married and have a bunch of kids. Yeah, essentially, what this is showing is that what women valued in men, in particular, was accomplishment. And from the amount of archaeological material that survives, showing women as administrators of land, as merchants, as in short, persons of very significant power and responsibility, we can pretty well take it that this was also what was desired in women. Njal's Saga actually has a really good example of what happens to a guy who marries a woman just because she's pretty. And this is Gunnar of Litherend and Hallgeir their Longlegs. And Hallgeir their Longlegs, as the by name suggests, she's got these long legs on her, and she's always beautifully dressed in clothes with really expensive dyes, and she's got a load of blonde hair, so she must be beautiful, because that's how you describe beauty in a woman if you're writing a saga. And she's also just bad to the bone. She lies, she cheats, she steals food from the neighbor in a famine because she's a rotten household manager and hasn't put away the cheeses she should have, so she has to go steal the neighbor's. She's an absolutely horrible person who makes Gunnar's life absolutely miserable, and has a lot to do with the circumstances that eventually cause him to be outlawed and bring about his death. However, one thing that's worth noting, and this is really pretty important when we're talking about gender and especially marriage relationships in the Norse, no matter how bad the wife was, the one thing a man didn't do was hit a woman. After the incident where Hallgeir has stolen the cheeses, thereby shaming and embarrassing Gunnar and the household in front of everyone, he finally, and few could blame him, loses it and slaps her across the cheek. And she gives him the hairy eyeball and says, "You're going to regret this." And at the end of his days, when his enemies have surrounded the house, they're there to kill him, there's no way out but to take as many of them with him as possible. So he's shooting at them with his bow, and the string breaks, and he looks at Hallgeir and her amazing long hair and says, "Hey, give me some of that hair for a bowstring so I can fight these guys off a little longer." And Hallgeir gives him the hairy eyeball again and says, "Gunnar, remember that time you slapped me?" And Gunnar kind of shrugs and goes, "Oh, fair enough so," and continues to fight without his bow and eventually gets killed. But the point is that even though she was an absolutely rotten person who'd done something pretty inexcusable, the fact that he'd slapped her was quite sufficient justification in everyone's mind for her to just let the guy die. You see the same thing. Apparently, it's perfectly cool for women to pick up weapons and take a whack at men who had in some way annoyed them. It's grand for women to seek revenge if they don't have a brother or someone to do it for them. But you couldn't take revenge on a woman. The only exceptions are when the woman has actually caused death by means of Sather, by untoward magic. And even there, in, for instance, Hrolfr Kraki's saga, the person who has to take down Skuld, Hrolfr's sister, who has been responsible for an awful lot of the trouble with her magic, isn't any of the completely human characters. It's Böðvar Bjarki's eldest brother, Elk-Frodi, who has been kind of outside humanity from the beginning. He's an elk from the waist down, and while his other brothers, who had increasingly less obvious animal characteristics, did very well for themselves. The second brother became a king. Third brother, of course, was Böðvar Bjarki, Hrolfr's hero. Elk-Frodi is always outside humanity. He lives up in the wilds, quacks the occasional outlaw if they give him trouble. Doesn't have much to do with humanity. And it takes somebody like this to actually seek out a woman to commit revenge on her. So there was this very, very, very strong sense of chivalry that a man just didn't hurt a woman.
Norse and Germanic women, I think in general, in that period married, they kept their property and things, didn't they?
For a given degree of keeping their property, it would. I think it was a different situation if a widow remarried. Normally, a daughter's share of the inheritance would basically be that dowry that went with her, and was kept as insurance against divorce, or else passed on to her children. Yeah, I would have to check to see what the precise status of a widow remarrying was, but the evidence is that by and large, that widows who remarried continued to run things as they had. And one thing to keep in mind in the Viking Age, that even as we see in medieval Europe, where women were much, much more constrained, a reasonable number of the men would be off for reasonable periods of time doing one thing or another. And therefore it fell to women to manage not only the immediate household economy, which had always been their main provenance, but to manage whatever estate there was, to manage whatever lands had to be managed, personnel, everything. And again, you see this very, very strongly in the runic inscriptions. Many of the rune stones, which are legal markers as well as social markers, are raised by women who seem to be large and in charge. You also get, mostly we have patronymics. Occasionally we get matronymics. We get sons named after their mother, and there's been a couple of analyses done on these. In Iceland, at least, where you see a matronymic, chances are that mommy was either a noted poet, a magical person of some sort, or a really big landowner in her own right. And this is something of considerable interest to me because although I chose the heathen name Gundarsson before I was aware of this, way back in the early Stone Age, or whenever it was, I later found out from a professional philologist in the UK that my mundane last name, Grundy, is actually probably one of these matronymics. It's probably from Guthrither, suggesting that in some time in the Danelaw there was a woman by the name of Guthrither who was a noted poet, a magical person, or a big landowner. Unfortunately, by that time, I'd already published a couple of books, and I was stuck with Gundarsson.
But basically, for the most part, I think men and women were much more equal than they would be later.
Very much so.
In or out of marriage.
Very, very much so. And again, this shows up in the freedom of divorce. This shows up in the interactions within marriage. It even shows up in the grave goods. And one of the interesting things we see actually in continental Scandinavia is that, well, on the average, given the same social classes, you'd get more or less the same value of grave goods, except as people got older, especially in the upper strata. Upper class men's grave goods in Norway get less and less impressive the older they get, whereas women's get more and more impressive. And that pretty much matches what we see in the sagas, with these great matriarchs running their whole households, and, giving advice to their husbands, giving advice to their sons, often giving more than advice. You see Bergthora, for instance, in Njal's saga, and she's got all these big husky grown sons, and they pretty much do what mommy tells them to do. Mommy says that guy needs killing, Sonny Boy says, yes, mama, and goes off and kills him. And that's a pretty common pattern, actually. Back to love, romance, and marriage. Now, the one area where we actually do see a real sexual discrepancy is this whole issue of polygamy or concubinage. And we can certainly say that some degree or some form of polygamy among the upper classes of the Germanic people is common pretty much through all the Germanic people. While Tacitus always needs to be read with considerable care, especially when he's talking about the sex lives of the noble savages, he does mention that the foremost men may have more than one wife, and because we do see this throughout continental Germany and Scandinavia, pretty much through the entire period, chances are Tacitus was probably accurate on that one. And this is something that stuck hard. Charles the Saxon Slaughterer, known to some people as Charlemagne, although I don't see what's so great about committing religious genocide, he actually, he was, as indicated, one of the foremost promoters of Christianity, usually by slaughtering people, but never mind that. And he quite happily had 4 concubines at one of the later points in his life. No issues with the church over it. It was a cultural thing, and he was a king, and it was cool. It was something that the church had not yet managed to root out.
There was a great book I read years ago that I should probably see if I could find again, but it was published originally in French, but it was about this change that the church goes from, and he's in there because it goes from, sure, you can have your concubine, sure, you can have the wife and the queen and then your unofficial wife and this, and then just within just a few years, they suddenly just, even kings couldn't get divorced.
Yeah, so, but the other thing about the institution of concubinage, concubinage was not exactly pure polygamy in the sense that the concubines did not have quite the same status, did not have quite the same rights as the number one wife, which is not to say that they were without status and rights, and might, as seen with, for instance, Melkorka, end up with their own household if the two couldn't get along. The crucial thing is that the concubines were nearly all of significantly lower status than the man to whom they were attached. This actually seemed to be, you'd look at it from the one point of view and you'd say, well, the advantages are all to the men. They can, get as much as they like, yada, yada. On the other hand, this was very, very much a way in which an accomplished and capable young woman of lower status could really get ahead, could see her children ending up as part of a much higher social status family. It was a benefit. It was a practice that had significant benefits for both sides. Now, there was also... undoubtedly, indeed assuredly, quite a bit of sexual exploitation of slaves, which might, as again with Melkorka, end up happily moving into concubinage, or might just be straight out bad exploitation, and that's the way it was back then.
Yeah, I was going to ask if concubines were primarily free women or thralls, slaves, or do we know?
We know that they came from both strata of society. There were certainly plenty of free women who became concubines. For a slave, it was a big step up. For a free woman of lower social status, it was something of a step up. But we see it. Generally, you had to be at least the equivalent of upper middle class because. It's more expensive to support a family with two or more wives and the appropriate multiplication of kids. But Freydis of Vinland fame, for instance, was Eiríkur the Red's daughter by his concubine who went to Greenland with him, along with his wife and his sons by her. And even among the gods we see this. For instance, Thor's heirs, his sons, who shall wield his hammer after Ragnarok, they are the sons of Thor and Jarnsaxa, his Etten concubine. By Sif, he's only got the one kid he's got Thrudr, who is a girl. If you want to say it's a bit sexist that the two boys by the concubine get the hammer and the girl by number one wife does, I won't argue it with you. Again, that's how our ancestors saw it. That's the story. There it is. But the point is that they are considered legitimate for every possible practical purpose. Now, interestingly, Sif also has a kid who is not her kid with Thor. Ullr is, according to Snorri at least, and he's basing this on Kinnings, which refer to Ullr as Thor's stepson. Ullr is Sif's by her and someone else, who we don't know. No indications. We just have the kinning that Snorri was working from and his description based on it. But again, that kind of falls into the category of the category suggesting that women certainly had a lot more leeway in their private lives than they would after the conversion.
In terms of romance, you mentioned there being romances and things in the sagas, but is romantic love, as we would kind of understand it, does that seem to play much of a part? Or in some cultures, I know it just sort of, they recognize it, but consider it something crazy.
It's dangerous. Not dangerous, definitely. And I would bet you anything that a lot of the cultures you're mentioning are set up like the Norse, where marriage was seemed to have been firstly a financial and socio-political arrangement, with the whole great romantic love a secondary thing. Certainly the outlawing of love poems, which may or may not have exerted magical influence in Iceland, suggests very strongly that yes, indeed, there was this sense of danger. There was this sense that it would get in the way, and that's also something that shows up in the sagas and in earlier works. One of the themes we find in some of the legendary sagas, for instance, is what we see in the story of Helgi Hundingsbane, where the couple is in love, the couple wants to marry, the wife's family is totally against it. There's a battle fought, kinsmen are killed, and he gets her, and in this case it doesn't go so well because her little brother decides it's time to take revenge for daddy and kills him shortly thereafter. We see a similar theme implied with Freyr and Gerður. This theme of an unattainable or at least difficult of attainment love is one that shows up among the gods and Ettins, among the legendary heroes, and among the plain old Icelanders, and sometimes it works out. As with Freyr and Gerður, although there is this one reference suggesting that Freyr still had to kill Gerður's brother for objecting to the marriage, and sometimes it becomes disastrous, as in the Volsunga saga, where the marriage that was supposed to work out again is interfered with magically. You know that Sigurdur is induced to fall in love with Gudrun and forget Sigurdrifa Brynhildr, and of course that leads to all the later catastrophes and the downfall of the Niflungar and the destruction of Worms and all that good stuff. Yeah, again, the draft of love. One of the interesting things, and so we.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
A nice segue from Volsunga and how the magic gets involved in the romances there to actual probable courtship or marriage customs is this theme of the draft of love that keeps showing up. In Volsunga Saga, we actually see these mind-altering drafts twice. one's given to Sigurdur, one later is given to Gudrun to kind of calm her down about the fact that her family just killed her husband and now wants her to marry Atli, to marry Attila the Hun. And her mom brews her up a drink that will make her okay with this. But again, you notice it's in the context of making a marriage go smoothly, even against the actual conscious wishes of at least one of the people getting married. We also see this bringing of a special draft in Sigurdrifamal, where Sigurdur has just awakened Sigurdrifa, and she brings him this draft of mead full of all sorts of wonderful magical stuff that if Sigurdur had then had the brain to use it, would have saved him an awful lot of trouble later, but never mind that. And part of this constant image that we see in these sources, and again on a number of the Gotgabr, a number of which seem to show a courting couple, a couple being wed and such. They all have this draft in them, whether it's a cup or a horn or what have you. There is probably a very strong sense that once you got past the kind of standard social thing of a woman bringing the horn to the guest, of the lady of the hall welcoming the guest with the horn, it could be taken in a much deeper context. It could be taken much more in the sense of a commitment or a vow. This could be used if one is doing magic to, kind of subvert someone's affections or redirect them or generate them as you liked. But it seems to show up regularly, and it may be one of the oldest customs. The Celts certainly seem to have used the giving of a draft from a special cup or vessel as part of the earliest marriage or commitment vows. And it's quite possible that this goes back to the Indo-Europeans, or at least to a fairly early stage of Celto-Germanic interaction, back in the days when we were peaceful farmers and they were iron-wielding imperialists.
What sort of customs do we know about in terms of courtship and possibly even the wedding itself?
Well, in terms of the wedding, that's an interesting one. Tacitus gives what purports to be a fairly elaborate description of the Germanic wedding customs. And as I said, he is kind of holding up the noble savages as an example to all those debauched city people around him. There's some question as to how much did Tacitus really know? How much did he get secondhand? Was he ever actually in Germania himself? But at any rate, he gives a pretty good description, probably, we at least hope, which involves the exchange of tools and weapons, indicating that both members of the couple are expected to defend each other. The passing of a sword, in particular, the giving of the family sword, which is attached to the family soul, that is something a theme that in one way or another shows up in a lot of the Norse literature, and there's really two strains of that going on. On the one, you have the husband passing the sword into his wife's keeping. The other theme is that of the daughter who keeps her father's sword because there's not a brother to pass it on to, and eventually gives it to her son after having either kept it safe or possibly, like Hervor, gone out and done some heroic deeds with it herself before she retired to settle down and have kids.
I was going to say that's an interesting thing to me, that even the sort of Norse badass women tend to still settle down and get married eventually.
Yeah. Again, it's that thing, you do whatever you do, but everyone's really kind of expected to carry on the family line. And what you do when you're not doing that was a bit more of your own business, quite possibly. But that's a whole other issue that we don't really have time to get into tonight, because it's a fascinating and complex issue.
No, but I'm fascinated actually in the amount of things you mentioned of the pouring with the magic, because everything you're saying to me implies a culture with a lot of romantic magic going on.
There was a lot of romantic magic going on. Certainly, if we look at the descriptions of the sagas, it's one of the things, because romance it's one of those liminal things, one of those border things. It's one of those things where anything can happen, and it can be wonderful or it can be awesomely catastrophic. So it's the sort of thing where you most need magic and where magic can most easily come in. But back to the wedding ceremony, the other thing that seems to be very much a part of it, at least in the Norse, is giving the wife the bunch of keys to the household. And what this meant, the Norse were reasonably into the separation of domestic spheres. The men went out and did stuff that generally, as an agricultural people, required bigger people with more muscle mass, and the women were responsible for the entire household economy, which, sounds a little bit Victorian, angel in the house, man at work, yada, yada, yada. Not the case in an agricultural society in a harsh environment, I can assure you. If the mother of the household, the lady of the estate, was not an extremely capable and hard worker, chances were the family wasn't going to have that good an odds at making it through the winter, because people produced a lot of their food. Dairy products were and remained in Scandinavia women's provenance. Men did the slaughtering. It was dangerous. It again required a lot more immediate muscle mass by and large. But women made the cheeses that were going to get you through the winter, the butter, the milk. That was and remained in Scandinavia women's duties. Women did the textile crafts, and if you didn't have textile crafts, you were going to be some unhappy campers once the snow started falling around the end of September, beginning of October. Women were responsible for the household finances. They were responsible for organization. In the cities, of course, there wasn't nearly as much of a household burden. So you did see women taking their places as merchants, as producers of goods for sale and what have you. But one would be very, very foolish to assume that the mistress of the household meant anything like the Victorian angel in the house.
No, I didn't think it did, but I'm really glad that you explained that, because with that so much distance between us and them, it's very hard to tell. I actually, I had someone on a list actually state they thought that a Jarl would be too busy to be doing things like farming. And I know that we talked about, what a Jarl's wife would do at one point, and it sounded to me like they were both pretty busy people.
Yeah, I mean, even the sons of kings worried about how many cattle they had, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and but so we've got the wedding, and we've got the courtship to a degree. But when we kind of have a historical perspective now, basically most people married because they were expected to, and to a large degree it was a matter of finding somebody of your own status or even slightly above if you were really lucky, and sort of glomming on. And then, well, what kind of households would form out of this?
Yeah, your household, the basic household unit was something that would not be quite like our nuclear household. Sometimes it would be. Sometimes you get the young couple moving out, having their kids. If they did that, they were early on, they were almost certainly a very wealthy couple. That nuclear house was also going to include a few hired hands, maybe a couple of thralls. It might well include, again, if they were of a sufficient wealth to afford it, it might well include the concubine and her kids. Most people, you'd be more likely to see a multi-generation household. You would see the grandparents and the kids and the grandkids together. And even when people did move out, they didn't tend to move very far out. You tended to you tended to stay within reasonably close calling distance of your family, especially in Iceland, where, of course, suing each other was the main Icelandic sport for entertainment and profit. But fighting each other didn't take a very far second place. So you wanted to have your kinsmen pretty close for, just in case, like.
So were most people mostly living in villages or independent farmsteads, or did it vary?
Yeah, it varied hugely depending on where you were. Again, if you're looking at Iceland, you're looking at more steadings, and you might have, you'd have people steadings either close together, or people sharing houses on a steading or what have you. Get to continental Scandinavia, you see the steadings and the individual farmhouses, and again, the further separated you were from other people, the more like you were to have the whole family in more or less one dwelling. And you went all the way up to the great halls of the jarls and kings, and the actual cities like York or Birka. In fact, we literally civilized the Irish. They didn't know about cities till we got here and built Dublin. And okay, I have to admit we built Limerick too. Maybe that wasn't so good of an idea, but never mind that.
There's always one.
There's always one.
So, what did people expect out of marriage? I mean, both in terms of their goals, but also, what would a husband expect from a wife? What would a wife expect from a husband?
Okay, what people seem to have expected out of marriage, there was a hope of romance,
yes.
But it was really the icing on the cake. What a husband expected in his wife was that she should be a good household manager and a wise advisor, and hopefully not get him into too much trouble. What a wife expected out of a husband was, again, that he'd be a hard worker, he'd be a good protector if it was needed. He'd be reasonably well behaved and not make stupid investments or do anything else appallingly stupid, and possibly that he'd do what she told him when she really meant it. When it came to matters that touched on the family honor and such, women seem to have been very much the final arbiters, at least in the sagas, the ones who would decide whether it was worthwhile making peace with the neighbor or whether the family honor had been offended. And even if it wasn't the brightest move, it was time for the men to kid up and go, slaughter someone. But in terms of actual love, we don't see a huge amount of overt affection described between married couples most of the time, but there is one example in Njal's saga, and this is at the end of Njal's life. He and his wife Bergthora are very, very old. Their sons are pretty much middle-aged, and Njal and his sons have managed to finally offend enough people that a whole bunch of people get together and come to burn the house. And being, decent, civilized Norsemen, they offer to let the kids, the slaves, and the women's come out. Even though Bergthora was in fact responsible for an awful lot of the trouble. Again, you just didn't hurt women. If you were going to burn someone's house, by gods, you let the women and kids come out. And Bergthora says something to the effect of, well, no, I've lived with you all this time. We've been together all this time, and I'm not going to leave you now at the end of it. And they go and they settle down in their marriage bed together and, are eventually overcome by the smoke and are found like that, curled up in the bed which they slept in together for all those years as a couple.
Now, see, that's very sweet and romantic, and something that I think modern people could really understand and identify with. So I guess now that we have a bit of background, how would people translate that into a very, very different society?
That's something we've been asking about in heathenry for a long time, because a lot of the things don't apply. I mean, your parents are probably not going to arrange a marriage for you with the guy or girl down the street who's, equally upper middle class or whatever. Very few people do the prenup protections, although from a heathen point of view, it's not such a bad idea. In fact, there's a lot to be said for the heathen practicality, since one thing that is not as easy now as it was back then, but still a lot easier than it was for a while, is divorce. As was the case in Iceland, a lot of people get divorced these days, and making that prenup arrangement in lieu of dowry and munder, especially these days when, both sexes are pretty much equally engaged in the workforce by and large, that would be a pretty good idea. Settling portions for the kids, settling things up to make sure everyone's taken care of if she's split. That's a good thing. Looking at it again, it's kind of like looking at farming, adapting a ritual like charming of the plow for modern work. These days there are people that go out there at the beginning of February or so and charm their computers. They bless their computers. It's the tool they work with. And likewise, in terms of marriage, I think it's safe to say that, a lot of people are going to be very happy with the designated gender roles, who gets the keys and who manages what. A lot of people aren't, and there's no need to be, because very few of us live in circumstances where one member of the family has to milk the cows and make the cheeses and brew the ale and make sure the storehouse is full, and the other one has to go out and bash bulls on the head with a sledgehammer. I would say that a lot of the gender role-based stuff is going to be a matter of personal taste, as long as someone's doing it. The important thing, there's no reason a man shouldn't be allowed to manage the household accounts if he's good at maths. It wouldn't be considered like actively unmanly or anything. It's perfectly, culturally permissible. It just wouldn't have been done back then because of the whole separation of spheres things, or at least not to a significant degree in everyday life. Men sort of manage big investments, but a modern man should hopefully be reasonably capable of keeping household accounts and making sure the savings are stocked up and there's food in the fridge and what have you, if he's better at that.
Yeah, well, and the growing trend, although still quite small, of house husbands, both voluntary and kind of involuntary, I think is another place where you see that. And, particularly if this is because the man is better at it, or the wife maybe the wife's got a really good job,
as with one couple we know, the wife's a surgeon, the husband's a house husband, and, does a great job managing the money and looking after the kid.
But in addition to that, though, I guess what I was thinking of sort of is what would be a good way of approaching marriage, romance, sexuality, and stuff from a heathen viewpoint in the modern world?
In the modern world, from a historical point of view, those are actually several different concepts which occasionally interrelated.
Okay.
The pure romance, the pure courtship side, I don't think that's changed much. I think people are still going to be entranced by a lot of the same things. Some people will be enchanted by poetry and athletic prowess, and some will be enchanted by capability in other ways. Everyone's got at least a bit of an eye for personal appearance, although tastes vary hugely. And likewise, I think most people, and especially in our culture, women are more used to being the recipients, are going to be charmed by love poetry of the sort that was illegal in Iceland, because not least romance getting in the way of practical marriage plans. Presents of jewelry, they were popular in the day. They don't go amiss now. Some of the tokens, now the traditional tokens, might have varied a bit. For instance, Olafur Tryggvason's wife was very upset when he gave her a large angelica plant without the manly courage to follow it through, both in the direct sense of winning back the lands that she had lost, that he was supposed to get back for her and didn't, and in the implied sense of, let's say Angelica was considered a traditional aphrodisiac back in the day, and there's a strong hint in the saga that he wasn't up to that either.
Oh my. Yes, I could see that being a problem. I think actually that was one place where looking at folklore might be a good idea, because I think it's kind of fun, at least ritually, once a couple is actually a couple, particularly if they're both heathen, or even, a heathen and a pagan, for example, you might want to exchange traditional types of gifts, even though normally maybe the woman doesn't use a drop spindle.
Yeah, and there's a lot of charm in that. There really is, and of course I mentioned already, the going out on May Eve or Midsummer's Eve and being out all night, gathering the greens and the flowers, making a wreath for your love's door, and singing it under the door at dawn, and all of those good things. That, very, very popular activity there indeed. And amber, in my experience, almost never fails.
Yes, of which I now have quite a collection.
So, when we're talking about love, romance, sex, marriage, and such, for modern heathens, as I mentioned, to our ancestors, these were separate, if occasionally overlapping things. But one thing that gives us, I think, as modern heathens, a good guide, is to look at our gods, and particularly to look at the goddesses that were involved with the different aspects of love, romance, and marriage. Now, we all, not least with a bit of an assist from Wagner, think of Frigg as kind of the exemplar of the good wife, the patron of marriages, and so forth. One interesting thing is that in Lokasenna, Loki mentions that she's also had it off with Odin's brothers, and nobody's really sure how to take this, but like the other things Loki says in that particular incident, it's probably true. No one can deny it. And whether, as some have suggested, this harks back to an older strain of possible polyandrous relationships of some sort, or what was going on. We don't really know, but it does suggest that Frigg's role isn't quite as cut and dried as Wagner would have it. It's also interesting to look at her handmaidens, her ladies, who cover a wide range of the things that women did, that women were expected to do, such as healing and so forth. And this group includes one goddess or demi-goddess or being who is responsible for keeping men and women to the vows they make to each other. There's another one who is specifically responsible for bringing together people who are in love and who are barred from each other in one way or another. In fact, a lot of gay heathens these days have taken this goddess as their particular patron, because it is, in fact, her role to bring together true lovers who are separated by social or other circumstances. Though hopefully her intervention will continue to be less necessary. as the world gets a bit more civilized and decent. But in any case, Frigg seems to encompass all of these different aspects within the wider range of the possibilities in marriage. On the other hand, we have Freya, and Freya may or may not be married. Snorri mentions her seeking her husband Other in Sturlufaldur, which is much later, but is our one of our main sources for the Brisingamen story. Freya is referred to as Odin's concubine, as his Frikla, and what this is suggesting, it's hard to tell whether the author who was writing from a rather more Christian viewpoint, who doesn't show Freya terribly well in this particular tale, was the author trying to denigrate Freya's role in society, her position, because it didn't quite suit anything like as well with the Christian view of what women should be, maybe so. At any rate, Freya seems to be perfectly free to take lovers, and she does among humans as well as gods, and rather like Odin, who certainly gets around in this regard. We see Freya with a human prince, eventually a king by the name of Ottar, who has courted her by means of gifts, and the way you court a goddess apparently is to slaughter cattle and such on her harrow, and kindle fires on a pretty regular basis there. But anyway, he's courted her with gifts and worship, and she turns him into a boar and rides him off to get some information and a magical drink from a giantess in the other world, which is part of the process that leads to Ottar becoming a king eventually. Now, this also, there's kind of a dark theme in the romance on the female side, which we see here, which shows up in various ways with various people, occasionally putting some rather perverse connotations on it, I might add. But this theme of the witch or nightmare that turns a man into a steed of some sort and rides him around at night. So some of the Christians did some very odd things with this indeed in the witch trials in Scandinavia in the 17th and 18th century in particular. But any way you look at it, Freya seems to be, if you like, the free woman. She's much desired by pretty much everyone. This frequent theme of giants doing one thing or another in hopes of getting her in marriage. And she does not seem to be under anyone else's power or direction, or legal constraints or what have you. And she is, of course, the patroness of this particular dangerous and possibly magical love poetry in Iceland, at least according to Snorri, but it seems perfectly reasonable. So one might suggest that if one is looking more for romance, for the romantic elements of courting, one would probably look towards Freya. One would probably think of Freya as the example, whereas for marriage in all of its various aspects, Frigg and her ladies might be more of the patrons one would wish to seek advice and assistance from.
So are there any of the gods that would be involved in marriage as well?
Well, that's a good question. One of the, possibly one of the best descriptions we have of Viking marriage is actually from Frimskvida. And although the context is half sacral and half burlesque, the whole Thor putting on a veil and pretending to be Freya thing, there's no reason to think that the structure isn't based on actual marriage ceremonies, because you can't do a parody very well if it doesn't have enough resemblance to the original to make it funny. And the end of it, the climax, is when the hammer is brought to be laid in the bride's lap. Now, this may have been for fertility. This may have been to drive out any untoward wights that were hanging about her, because that period between betrothal and marriage was, again, one of these border periods. In the folklore, that's when people of both sexes were most vulnerable to being seduced, taken away, what have you, by Alfar or trolls or other wights. This hallowing with the hammer to make sure that there was nothing hanging about might also have been a good idea in that regard. And of course, it's the climax of the poem, because the bride is in fact Thor in drag, and here this stupid giant has just handed over the hammer, which Thor stands up in his skirts and his veil and immediately smashes in everyone's head, with Loki undoubtedly going hee 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 in the background. As far as examples of marriage, we see Thor with his concubines. Interestingly, Freyr, who is best known for his mighty manliness, only seems to sleep with one woman, and this is Freyr and Gerther is another of the classic romance in a situation of social barring, restriction, the objections of the woman's family, in this particular case, the initial objections of the woman herself, but let's not go into that. It's actually one of the Eddic tales that I find the diciest. But at any rate, once he's married Gerther, they seem happy. He never seems to make it with anyone else. The Inglings are actually descended from Freyr and Gerther, and not Freyr and a human woman, as is the case with most of the lines Odin fathered. Odin, of course, gets around where he pleases, and Frigg doesn't seem to particularly mind. The one time where we see Odin heading out to do whatever he's going to do, in this case, okay, it's a riddle contest with a giant, but he's heading out to go do something on his own time. And Frigg blesses his going and blesses his coming and blesses his return, so she seemed perfectly happy to turn him loose to do whatever he's going to do, or whoever he's going to do, as the case may be.
So at least in theory, people were probably a little more tolerant of things. That
seems to be the impression one gets. Now, again, there's a lot of variance. There are local laws here and there that suggest that there were at various times various legal penalties for adultery, which interestingly seem to have been fairly egalitarian. If anything, a bit harsher on the men. But it's very hard from the written sources to see any evidence of these being enforced. It's hard to tell. Again, long space of time, a lot of local variance. Certainly the Arabs who came to visit Hedeby or the Vikings possibly in Ireland, guys like Ibn Rusta, they were all very shocked at how much personal freedom Norse women had, but then considering the source, that might not have been saying much. Hard to tell there, but the overall impression is that there was certainly a lot more leeway than there was after the conversion.
And finally, I have to ask, what about same-sex couples, both traditional and modern?
You wouldn't have gotten gay marriage under any circumstances, because the whole point of marriage was, it's a financial and socio-political thing, and you had kids to carry on the family line. There's almost no references to woman-on-woman activity. I think there's one law, I believe Norwegian, I'd have to check to be sure, that provides for penalties for a woman who breaks off a marriage to a man on the grounds that she's gay, and likewise for a man who breaks off a marriage to a woman on the grounds that he's gay. But those are more by way of, this is not considered an acceptable excuse for breaking a legal contract. There don't seem to have been any laws against same-sex activities. There was a lot of social, very, prison yard macho about particularly what position a guy took in bed. There's a wonderful poem about Greta, which suggested that Greta would shag anything that didn't run away fast enough. I believe "would shag the Pope in Rome" is in there somewhere.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
There was this macho attitude in terms of gender roles. It was a very normatively masculine culture, which meant that it was not considered cool for a man to act in a manner considered effeminate. It was fine, grand, and perfectly freaking awesome for a woman to act in a manly way. Women who put on armor, dressed in men's clothes, went off to avenge their daddies. The whole maiden warrior number, that was awesome. And if a woman took up a weapon and stood beside her husband when he was attacked, as happened on occasion, that was absolutely freaking great. The other way around did not socially fly. Now, chances are, considering the circumstances and conditions, it's a pretty safe guess that what happened on the longboat stayed on the longboat, and what Sven and Bjorn did on their fishing trips was their business. But you get a few of these sort of, great lifelong friendships, and whether anything else was happening, who knows, but if they had been, they wouldn't have been talking about it.
And it traditionally would fall into kind of that category of in between,
Yeah, now it's kind of ironic, actually, that according to Norse law, there would have been no penalty for publicly shagging your same-sex lover. But if someone called you the word which translated pretty well contextually and otherwise as faggot, you were perfectly legally entitled to beat the snot or sue the snot out of them. You might call it the world's first political correctness language laws.
Well, this has been really, really kind of fun and educational and interesting. And I think maybe more around May or something, maybe we'll do a show like more on, we've sort of concentrated on marriage and a little bit on courtship, but maybe a little bit more on the tra-la-la stuff.
Yeah, this has really, been a bit more of a historical overview and mainly focusing on the Viking Age. But possibly come May, when it's an appropriate time to be thinking about love and courtship and all that good stuff, we can do a show with more focus on the folk customs, and particularly the ones that may have survived, and a bit more of the practicalities of how to go about it.
Yeah, I was going to say practically how to go about it, how to do a ritual in the modern context and keep some of the traditions. I think that'll be great. I'll look forward to that. And
if you like, I might even give some clues on how to do traditional love spells.
Oh, now that would be really fun. Okay, on that note, I think this is a great place to end, and I want to thank my audience for joining us this evening, and we'll see you next time for Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.